It's taking that strategy and making it a reality, right? And that's why it goes way beyond a spreadsheet. Well, we wanted to take this episode. We were originally planning to define what operations is, what project management is, because a lot of it gets confused. I've even had people define it for me as being a human dashboard or someone that runs one-on-one meetings. And that is very much a part of it. I mean, that's a part of a lot of different roles, right? So
Yeah.
to say that that's what operations is really distilling it down to a component or maybe an element of the role, but that's not exactly what it is. And I was thinking back to one of the many moments where I started to fully invest into more of an operator role. And this was a long time ago now, and yet it stayed with me, and the habit I think has stayed with me, where I was working with clients, and the clients were happy enough, but I recognized that chaos would ensue if I did not have my own system for how I was going to start working with my clients. And I was working with them in a marketing capacity. So, as you can imagine, especially being a digital marketer, there are a lot of different channels that you need to keep track of and organize and plan content for, content to make, and communication to also plan for with your clients. And there was no set standard in the environment that I was in. There were some tools and resources, but no clear path for or structure for how to navigate working with the clients and a structure for the marketing either. So there were a lot of different reasons for needing that, and it was very chaotic, and I recognized that early on. And something that I had approached in every job and every role that I've had is this understanding that you can't create in chaos. We need to get organized. I like to think about it, it's more than just organization though. And when I recognized that I was the only person that saw that and nobody else was really thinking in that way, I first started building it for me and making it my own system. And I built out the structure that I needed for the day to day, the week to week, the month to month, that incorporated all the different platforms, the content plan,
Right.
because as you and I think have talked about before, strategy and planning are two very different things. And having a place to hold all of that is very different too. And so I figured out the operational architecture for my role, for what was needed within the company and for the clients, in a way that helped clarify what's the communication, when is it happening, who is sharing to what. I also figured out how to best communicate with my colleagues so that we were collaborative. And once I had built out those frameworks, the work itself became more enjoyable and became lighter because I had the guardrails, I had the expectations built around. And once I did that for me and people saw how successful it was and impactful, the results that came from that, then they started asking me to train other people on it.
You just described, people have called it a flywheel, right?
Yeah.
It's you get a certain amount of momentum going, and the wheel will spin itself to some degree, right? And you'll get people, people will see things working, and people want to be a part of things that work, not things that fail,
Yep.
or things that are hard, or full of friction, or whatever the case may be. I owe my view of operations, even going back as far as my Air Force career. Operations is the how for me. It was the mission. How are we going to accomplish the mission? Say this with a tongue in cheek: kill people and blow up things, right? That was, how are we going to achieve that mission, or spy on, or whatever, right? Well, in a more sedate world of corporate America, it's a strategy. How are we going to hit that strategy? How are we going to deliver? A plan and strategy are not the same thing. So we have to have a plan to get to the strategy, and the operations is how we get there, right? And so there are tendrils and connections and hooks, and all sorts of vines growing around all of it. But at the end of the day, operations is only just the how.
Yeah. It's taking that strategy and making it a reality, right? And that's why it goes way beyond a spreadsheet. That's why it goes way beyond a calendar event with an individual, because there's so much work involved in being the connector that is ensuring communication is happening cross functionally. It's, for the company in a way that people understand it. You're translating it for them so they understand where they fit into that strategy in the implementation, and they see that the impact that their role or their team's role is meant to have. And so while I believe in helping to simplify things and use analogies to make it clearer, when you distill what operations is down, it's simply having a bunch of meetings all day. That does not fulfill all of the complexity that the role has to carry, and
It's a
doesn't,
disservice.
yeah, it does a very huge disservice. I do believe there's a huge confusion between operations and project management.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dig into that, let me pull on one thing you said there. If you miscast operations for what it is, you do it a disservice. True story. The one thing you said right before that that sort of triggered to my mind a guideline that will help. You said, hey, operations is more than just meetings and calendars and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. The one tool or guidepost you can use for should I have this meeting? Should I send this email? Should I create this artifact? Does it fit in the operation or operations workflow? And is it in service of that strategy? If that meeting doesn't have a direct service to that strategy or even indirect, it doesn't need to happen. If that email doesn't move the ball in operations, keep that flywheel spinning, you may not need to do that email. If your strategy lives in a slide deck, you don't have operations. And if you're building all this work that doesn't tie to operations, you don't have for operations or you're not using it or, however you want to look at it.
To your point, it's not how strategy gets documented either, right? There's the other idea that operations is simply building out SOPs, and that is a component of it. That is
Piece.
a component for helping communicate how we are going to be implementing a workflow, but how it shows up in the work that people are doing on a Tuesday afternoon. If
Yeah.
your strategy is great, you can have a perfect strategy on paper, but your operations could be broken, and that can happen for a number of different reasons. But I think a lot of people see it as, well, the strategy is the hardest part and it needs to be the most complex. And without getting into what strategy is too
Strategists
deeply,
will say that. Strategists will say that anyway. Yeah.
well, one of my favorite is Roger Martin, and he simplifies it down to strategy is where you're going to play and how you're going to win, right? And that's why operations has to be so very clearly tied to strategy and involved in developing the strategy, depending on where you land in the operational layer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, Operations isn't the function that happens after the fun stuff of coming up with the strategy, right? You need to be embedded
It
in
has
that.
to be part of the conversation. Or else, how about this? You can learn this lesson by listening to us. You can learn the lesson the hard way. If you don't have the person whose responsibility it is to watch operations from start to finish, top to bottom, if you don't have that person in the room as the strategy at least is getting close to being broadcast or shared, it's going to cost you somewhere in that organizational spectrum timeline. You
If you
have to go back and recapitulate something.
Well, if you're all
Yeah.
if you're over here designing strategy and you haven't considered what the operational reality is. So for example, I've been in many rooms where a leader has a grand vision, which is wonderful, and they're looking 5 years down the road, and you have to refocus and recenter on, this is great. We need to look at what is the reality of the here and now so that we can also move closer to that vision with an understanding of what the context of our reality is today. I think I've seen a lot of people fall into this sort of trap of planning and trying to execute for the vision that is 5 years from today and not
Yeah.
realizing that there are real constraints, that the 5 year vision isn't where the people are. So we need to take it milestone by milestone, and we can reverse engineer like 5 years to today, but expecting, I think this is maybe what, distilling it down. It's this idea that if you paint the vision, then you expect operations to simply start working in that fashion. And it's great. this idealized strategy from an operational reality, that's also where it's going to break. It's going to die on contact with the team.
Your operations will be starved of oxygen from the kickoff, right?
Yeah.
And I'll take a pass at the 5-year plan, and then I'm going to bring us back just for a moment to kind of that where people get confused between program management and operations. Because you touched on it at the beginning, and as you were walking through that narrative of how operations are defined against the strategy and looking forward, those are some of the pitfalls where false equivalence rather is made. We try to get out of theoretical into the what I call the tactical and practical. In my experience, you cannot function as an enterprise organization going year to year or in terms of
Hmm.
planning. 5 years is so far out, it's almost worthless except for anything more than a vision. The cone of uncertainty is so wide out there that far that I'd say if you could even identify the trends that you were going to be chasing, you'd be making it up. Trends, especially today with AI, where we're changing things every 6 months. A 5-year roadmap is a waste of time.
Yeah.
The sweet spot that used to be perfect would be 3, right? You are locked in tight on this year. You've got probably about a 50% certainty of year 2, and year 3 is by nature 25%, right? And you can move that needle higher based on what you know about what you're going to try to build and how long it's going to take you to build it or put it to the market in years 2 and 3. But that 150-25 is a pretty good measure. Anything more than that, and again, you're just guessing and you're committing and planning resources that more likely than not won't be available, or you won't have funding for them or something along those lines, right? Or somebody in the quote business will about 2 quarters into year 2, realize they're not hitting their KPIs for that quarter and their OKRs for that year, and they're going to pull the plug. Anything you plan for
Hmm.
year 3 is now out the window, at least for that
Yeah.
line of business, right? So, yeah, 5, it's neat, but it's just academic in these. My job as a program manager and leader of program managers is what do we have to do to keep that how moving at the pace it
Mm.
needs to be successful? Who do we have to consult and inform at key places during that time to keep this thing moving? Who do we have to hold accountable, or who do we have to get decisions from or checkpoints from to make sure that we are still on track? Who is the one saying, yes, you did hit the OKR, or no, you did not, right? I think of it as my job there to look at core samples, slices, whatever metaphor you want to use at any given time to see, are we still doing the right thing with the right people at the right pace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. In operations, we're talking about a design discipline that helps determine whether a vision survives translation into work. And to your point, there's so many changes in the external changes like technology. We were talking about AI and how week to week everything changes, right? So planning that far out can be very detrimental, and you could be chasing something that keeps moving, that the target or the environment keeps changing around you, and maybe you need to change your target. And I've seen that happen even in I go way back to my earlier career experiences where people will invest in the even the 1, 3, 5-year strategic plans, and they don't have the discipline in designing an environment that will allow that vision to succeed or to flourish and adapt in a way that's needed. And one of the things that I appreciate about program project management is that, especially in Agile, where we met in a training course on Agile, you have to
Yeah.
stay adaptable. And you mentioned, the who are you communicating to? How is the work happening from a day to day? You're managing the timeline of it.
Yeah.
And you
Right.
have to be really cognizant of the timeline, but open to adapting and making sure that, scope is defined, that deadlines are defined, and you have your set resources. It's a critical function in the same way that anyone in an admin role is managing the tasks associated to that work, and operations designs the whole system, the architecture, the house, if you will, that makes all of those areas function possible, and the rooms all connect to each other, right?
Yeah, yeah, and what's funny about that is you'll see what I think of as varying levels of support for that 1, 3, and 5, depending on who it was who was championing it or not. The other thing you'll see is there will be people, and I hate to say it this way, strategists that I've worked with more times than not will say, "Hey, we did all the work up front. Here is the strategy. Capital T, capital S. Here it is. Now go implement the strategy, Mr. Ops guy." Right? Okay. Well, and then they go off to the strategy. They've got work to do the next the strategy. I get it. But
Mhm.
they cannot, as the parent of that baby that they just handed me an infant, right? I'm at best the uncle, right? I'm a very invested party, but I'm not the parent. It's their
Yeah.
baby. They cannot divest themselves of responsibility for that strategy when they hand it off to me. I try to get them to understand what they're doing is they are now partnering with me, right? And we walk that journey together to get that baby to high school. And you'll see
Right.
them hand that off and then I'm done, right? I did this. No, not if we want to be successful together.
Yeah.
You'll see a situation where you'll have an executive, he or she will come in at kickoff and they will give you that really rousing Newt Rockney speech of, let's go forth and conquer and let's do this thing and let's beat the market and let's win and all this other strategy cascade stuff. And then you don't see them again for 3 months until the first QBR, right? And then you see that look on their face of confusion, frustration, anger, or whatever the particular vibe that you're building in them that day because you haven't seen them. They haven't seen you in 3 months.
The whoever is coming up with the strategy just hands it off. Just if people know me, they know I don't believe you just do anything.
That's right. Yeah.
However, there is this, I think, this idea in the mind that, well, I hand off strategy for you to implement, and then to your point, I leave, and now you have to report on it. And if you fail, it's because you failed at this perfect strategy on paper, which
Right. My strategy was beautiful. You didn't implement
you
it.
didn't you didn't influence it. And that's why operations has to work so closely with people. That's where the misconception that, "Oh, it's just meetings with everybody." It is. There can be a lot of meetings. To your point, they have to be intentional too. I'll break down like 3 questions I think operators need to constantly keep asking, whether it's themselves or other people. One,
Both. Yeah.
are we aligned? This gets to your point of it's not just handing off strategy for planning, in my point of taking strategy and making it a reality, right? You have to be working together. The whole team has to be aligned together, and this is why communication is so important, because you are a translator and you have to understand how to communicate the vision that was set in a way for people to understand it, understand their role in it, and make sure that what the team is doing matches what the company actually needs to do in that quarter, right? It's not simply about are our tasks aligned or our timelines aligned, but are we all aligned in the understanding? Because information is different from understanding. You could give
Yeah.
me, a CEO could give me the information that I need, but it doesn't mean that I understand. And a really,
What you just said there about number one, I think is relevant for me to inject into. I'm being sort of cartoony when I say, the architect. I really have met those people, or the strategist rather. The strategist cannot hand that off to me and expect me to drive it the same way they would because I am not paid to be a strategist and an ops guy.
mm,
Okay. I'm paid to be an ops guy who has solid business acumen enough to be able to do his job well and then some. And that includes being able to, I know the strategy, I'm conversant with it, but I'm not 2, 3, 4 clicks down in the details of the strategy. I can't live there. So
yeah.
by virtue of that, I've got to have that person come with me as a partner all the way through the life cycle. Now, intermittently, they have more or less involvement. They are more or less pulled into conversations, but they're always available and they too are always keeping their finger on the pulse of the thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that actually is a good bridge to the next question. Do we have clarity? And does everybody, and that kind of ties into that understanding that I was getting to of, are we aligned? Do we have clarity? And do we know what success looks like? Because I need to be clear on a multitude of different things, but ultimately I need to be clear on expectations. And those aren't always conveyed in a plan laid out or the strategy that's set. And then, I think every operator probably knows that they're asking this or has their own similar version of this in their minds, but does the structure support our goals? Because a lot of what I've seen in many different businesses is that a goal is set, and it can be a stretch goal, it can be a really great lofty goal. It could be a goal that is very much achievable in an even shorter amount of time than they give themselves credit for. If the resources aren't there, if there isn't training around it and helping guide people with that clarity and that understanding and alignment, then you do not have the org chart or the resources to execute on that vision. And
Yeah.
this is start to see things break. And it's not even the structure of the company in terms of the org chart, it's also your workflows too, right? As you bigger, you need to get simpler in what it is you're doing. Simple fails. Complexity breeds chaos.
You get so stuck on trying to keep the system running that you are focused on the system, not what the system serves. And
Yeah.
you've written about it not too long ago in that call for simplification.
Mhm.
Your goal is not to make the most bulletproof, complicated thing. Your goal is to make the very simplest thing that will keep the ball rolling, no more, no less.
Right.
Fit, clean, dry, and serviceable, as the Air Force we used to say. It's just agile, whatever method you want to call it, or whatever measure you want to call it, fit for purpose, just what you need to get the job done, no more, no less.
Yeah.
Anything else is either not enough or it's just it's distracting, right?
I know. Well, I'll give you an example too, because I have a marketing background. And I work with a lot of different folks in marketing and different manners, right? In house, freelance, fractional, agency. One of the things that I've found consistently happens is that a company understands they need marketing, right? Or they need to enhance what they're doing in their marketing. And so they do, and they hire in some form or fashion. And that person comes in. And usually in marketing, oftentimes, at least, especially with limited resources, your marketing strategy is developed by the same person who's executing it, right? And you might have a
Yeah.
very small team,
Yep.
but that person comes in and they make great strides, but the company has not enabled themselves from a business development point of view to handle the influx of attention or the lead generation and nurturing that has to occur, or the client service and experience. That's another huge
Yeah.
part of it. And
Right.
so it breaks, and it usually breaks in those areas because they have I think they've undercompensated and overdeveloped an area that they didn't realize impacts every other function of the business. And I've
Right.
seen that now from an operations point of view, but also from a marketing point of view, where you build up a really strong pipeline for a client and they have an influx of leads coming in and they can't handle it. And then they go back to marketing and they say, well, the leads aren't good enough, or, well, no, we never touched them because we don't know
Yeah.
what to do with it, or we don't have a CRM. They don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to handle the greater development and the influx or the extra attention, the volume that's been generated for them, whatever that might be. And so they've not set themselves up for the success that they're trying to attain.
Right.
And where having a really strong operator or team of operators who know how to handle the different levers across the organization and set up the structure to be able to sustain the growth that you're aiming to achieve.
You've got the marketing folks that on this end of the spectrum, and they're putting that marketing plan together. They've got the go to market, they've got the playbook, they've got all that kind of stuff. They've got the collateral. They've been working with the sales enablement team, if you're lucky enough to have one, that really gets that stuff codified. So the salespeople, so the people out there on the street generating the calls and get smart on the product and can get smart on how to market and sell the product, right? Well, the sales team is out there trying every possible thing they can to sell, to your point. Sometimes they're selling before they're fully baked on the product. Sometimes they're selling before the product is fully baked and marketed, and the go to market is not yet solidified, or the enablement team hasn't had a chance to put it in training or what have you. So when you have found yourself in the situation you described, because I have to think this was an academic, and you talked about, well, a person who can pull this lever and know this thing, that's great. What are, like, when you are talking to one of our listeners and they find themselves in that really ugly hot seat you just described? What are, like, two things that you've done that they could do and maybe rescue themselves from the conundrum they find themselves in? Or just like say two things that you've done that say you do this and you do this and it'll take the heat off a bit.
It depends on what it is that you're building, right? But, well, or who you have on the team too. And I think one of the things that I have seen adjacent or in conjunction with the infrastructure problem is that there isn't any one decision maker involved in the changes that are happening in order to have continuity. So you need to have a point person, ideally your operator. You need to have someone who is managing the continuity of those changes because that person is going to be able to see where something is going to break and know who to reach out to or who to go to. So, let's say you are aiming to increase sales quota and you know that you're seeing a higher volume of leads coming in and maybe the sales team is set up for that but the client services team is not set up to handle the
Yeah.
higher volume of clients incoming to launch
Yep.
them.
Yep.
That's where you have someone in operations, ideally, who can foresee where something is going to break because of a bottleneck, because of capacity constraints, because of resource constraints, especially in, service industry. If you're working in a product industry, obviously you need someone operating and making sure that your supply chain is
Yeah.
able to sustain that. But,
Everything's
come
ideal. And in this world, everything's ideal. Yeah.
everything's ideal, but I think what I have seen the most is that there is no one person who understands the whole value chain and can build consistency and continuity across it by understanding where something is going to break. And that's another question to ask when you're getting to an extra layer of growth in the business, whether it be leads or adding additional team members to the team. You need to look at where's something going to break, where do we have redundancy and overlap? That's another thing that I've experienced too in adding new roles to a team.
Yeah.
Making sure that I've done this plenty of times where I've literally pulled up two different job descriptions and looked at what are the responsibilities of each, what KPIs are they responsible for, who are they reporting to, and found redundancies across that I know are going to have an implication down the road in how those people collaborate together, the work that's being done, the decisions that are being made. So having someone pay attention to the continuity, especially so that they can pinpoint where something is going to break. Because if you haven't built the structure yet, getting back to your point, you might not have the enablement needed. You need to have that one person who oversees and understands it.
It's that one person who finds themselves in the fortunate position, quote, of having enough visibility to know and experience to know where it's going to break. That one, and to me, that's as good an answer as you can give when you're in a situation where you don't have all the pieces in place and you're at that, might call it that embryonic stage where you have to lay down operation runway as the plane is coming into land. That happens to us all the time. And this is not a universal answer, and this is not something that you do long term. It's not scalable, but it goes back to something you've done before and you and I have talked about it, and I've done it. Put your cape on. It's time for some heroics, and it's time for some proactive, deep communication management with the stakeholders and the people who are responsible 2 steps down in that operations flow. Like you talked about, just like I said to you at the beginning of that continuum, don't surprise me as the ops guy by handing me the strategy in a package and running away.
Yeah.
That poor person down there on the other end who are responsible for supporting it, bring them in, repay that kindness on this end by bringing in them early and say, we are gapped here, here,
Hmm.
and here. Because we're gapped here, I expect you to have some stickiness here, a gap problem here, and a major crisis here.
Yes.
Let's partner up and try to band-aid that sucker as much as we can before you get hit between the eyes. Just people being proactive, and it's just communication. Charisma and charm can get you in the door, but have to partner with those people in a meaningful way and give them the straight truth about what's about to hit them and
Yeah.
say, "How can I help you not flame out?"
That is that's
This was no fault of
exactly.
yours. Yeah.
I want to underline it for everybody. That's exactly the point too. It does take courage to say that and being the person that can say that, but you also kind of have to say it because because
No one else will.
Nobody else will. You need to be that person. And to me, it's also a matter of integrity, right? If you're an operator, you are in care of the business and responsible for how things are moving and working. And the people, ultimately, the people, it's to me, it's very much a people leadership role, no matter how much tools, tech, machinery is involved. And caring for the impact on them needs to also be of utmost concern. And so sometimes it has, those difficult, hard conversations. But you mentioned being proactive too. And so having that person who has the continuity to understand where things can break and then communicate that before it happens is key. And I think you can apply both of these points that we're making to any kind of business or situation, any kind of change or development that's happening. And it will be a great practical guide for anyone. I think that's how you would also want to apply it in project management too, but I do want to steer us into more program project management so we give it its fair share and due on the pod.
Well, I'm all about that. I will say this, what you and I just talked about there when it comes to tools, people, process, and tools, let's say, some of what that you just sort of touched on, I would call that we could dig in an episode 4 and talk about the very real nature about of what's happening to operations and to program management as a discipline because of the tools, right? Your AIs and all those kinds of things, right? All those impacts that we're aware of, and some that maybe the folks that are listening to us are not aware of that are coming. And then also, too, we talked at the beginning about people confuse program management and operations. They do. And we talked a little bit about that. The sort of flip side to that is project and program management's fault if that lingers. And I'll tell you why I say that. They for two reasons. Either they're not listening to what their customer in that operation space is saying, and they're not answering the questions that they're asking. So they are giving them the impression that, or frankly, they're focused on the wrong thing. If I as a project or program manager or a team of a PMO, if I am all about EVM and all the other kind of stuff, all those old metrics and all those old numbers, and I'm not focused on strategy and productivity and all that, I am doing exactly what they think I'm doing. And again, now this is big time fodder for episodes 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. The PMO is dying or dead. And I think of that as a good thing. As a guy who's been stuck in PMOs his entire career, one way or the other, we have to double down on that impulse and listen to the message. If what we do is unclear, it's on us to be clear, right? The value we bring, the focus on strategy, not the focus on quote metrics. But don't get hung up on that tool. Get hung up on getting the message out.
Well, let me
You know,
ask you, how do you know when you have misalignment?
Yeah, man. The short answer is the easy answer is you know it after you begin to see it missing. Very proactive. So the proactive answer is predicated on you've been around the block long enough to know that if you look forward based on experience and you don't have this, and this, you know you're going to fail or you're going to be in a big trouble. Like a lot of folks who grew up and became program managers and operators, they came up through a path that was not formal. We went to operator school. We didn't go to program manager school. We went to the school of experience, right? And so everything we do, unless we're just like PMI junkies, everything we do is based on experience and what worked. And then we lather, rinse, repeat till it fails. Well, so the answer to the question you asked is how do I know when I've got enough to proceed confidently as much as I can, where I'm not just waiting, but I'm also not running headlong into disaster. Right off the bat, if the big one is I need to know that that strategy that I was handed has one person, just one in a position of leadership that they put their name on the dotted line for that strategy. Say, this is quote my strategy. I bless it, I sign it, I want it, and I'm going to support it. I need that because without that, I now have to continually run a rearguard action against scope change, just plain old metrics. Whose numbers are we measuring against? If I've got that one person who is responsible and cares enough to see it all the way through, my life and my job is infinitely easier. Do I get that? Something not all the time, not even 50% of the time. But when you get that, you know you're in pretty good shape. So when I
Yeah,
don't have it, I know right now that now I have to put up some guardrails and I know that I've got more work to do than I should have
yeah.
kicking this thing off because I don't have it. Now, I will keep trying to get it, but I don't always get it. right? That's one.
Well,
That
this is
that
the
number one is the owner. Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
this is the curveball I'll throw in the middle too. You don't always get it. And that means there's some level of ambiguity. And one thing
Yes.
that I realized is there are those of us who are able to tolerate ambiguity at higher levels and still take action. How do you know when it's simply, I can handle the ambiguity and still take action versus I truly do not have enough clarity around this to be able to move forward?
The answer, as silly as this sounds, and this one took me a long time. I had to go from 3 different maturity levels in my career. The first one was just absolute paralysis because I had grown up the hard way and I didn't have all the answers way back when. If I didn't have that box, it's like, "Oh, what do I do?" And you would just sort of sit until your boss said, "Get wake up and go. Go where?" "Well, I don't know, but go." Right? Later on, it got to the point where you get to about middle maturity where you would say, "Well, you know what? I'm just gonna wing it. I know I can't wait. I kinda have a sense of what I gotta do, and so I'm gonna go this direction." And you're kinda bouncing off the walls a bit, and you're living on borrowed time and charm and favors and luck,
Yeah.
and you'll get stuck at different interesting places. Well, finally, the very best you can do is what I call maturity level 3, if you will. My strategy from on high, if you will, at the beginning of the year, end of the year, that kind of thing. I've got my strategy in a box, and I've got from that some KPIs, some OKRs. They're not all defined, but I've got something to begin measuring against. So the short answer is as long as I've got some boundaries and some checks to say, am I above the line, below the line, right? I've got enough to get started. Can I get very far? God knows. Depends on what I've got, but I have enough to get started because the cascade is in my hand. The strategy built on that cascade is here, and I've got some starter OKRs and some starter KPIs. I've got something to move with. And now it's not just kids playing soccer and it's
Yeah.
not paralysis, right? It's thoughtful, measured movement to a certain point. And then you have to either say, look, now I'm stuck, which you better not. You better have anticipated, like we said before, anticipate, proactively push for more, be like an N plus one, like we'd say, like in agile terms,
Yeah.
this sprint plus one, have more work in the pipeline, in the backlog for the next sprint so that you don't run out of work. Try not to run out of KPIs and OKRs either, you know, don't run out of measures or then you're stuck. That's the hopefully useful answer to your question.
I think it's a great answer. There's a sort of follow-up point question that I'll bring up now too, because and I actually mentioned this on my leadership podcast because as a leader I realized I was operating from an understanding with managers about them managing their projects. And as I was finishing up my formal training of organizational management and project management, it dawned on me they've not been trained on this. And so they don't understand all of the components in the work, the continuity needed, the communication needed that goes into not planning for a project, but nurturing and seeing it through and stewarding a project from beginning to end. Once I realized that, I realized what I needed to give them. And so that's why I talk about it from a leadership component. But I do wonder how often are people put in positions in companies where they are essentially the project manager or the program manager, but it's not part of the scope of their role, or they've not maybe it is expected and they have responsibilities around that, but they've never been formally trained or even informally trained or coached. And that's where projects can go to die, not because
Yes.
it's really their fault or you are to blame them, but they are not given the resources, the tools, the training, the support that they need, or the clarity to understand that you're a project manager of this project. And
Right.
yeah, so I'm curious, you were specifically brought into many companies to be that role, but what about the companies that don't have that formal role? And so they're relying on someone who is really great as an IC and specialist, and now they've been elevated perhaps. And maybe it is still an IC role. I don't know. But in my experience, it's usually someone who comes from an IC role and they're elevated to a manager position or a leadership position and they're not able to handle the
Well, yeah, they're elevated into a position of responsibility with no power. Don't even get me started. Right. Most of the time, the secret to program management, the secret to sanity in this role that I inhabit is to realize you have most of the responsibility and none of the authority. Even if
Mhm.
you have some, pretend you don't, because it's really not enough to make everything work seamlessly, right?
Right.
You cannot authorize your way to success, right? And you know that as a Maslow will not allow you to smack people into success, right? Dadgummit. So you asked the question how many times? 11 out of 9. 11 out of 9 times, that's exactly what happens. And I say that because, again, based on experience and based on people, continues to happen today. I've watched over the last umpteen years, I've watched people go and get pulled right into the same channel that I got pulled into. It's just the way it happens. So that person who finds themselves in that project management role with a title that may or may not match, my old boss at Accenture would call it, I have an opportunity. He'd say, hey, Kale, I have an opportunity for you, which meant something is on fire and you're the guy I need to come put it out, right? These folks in that place have that, opportunity. So they have an opportunity now to learn on the fly. And rather than saying what the reality is and the churn they're about to face, I'm going to tell that person, if they're listening and they find themselves in that place, whether you think so or not, you did not fall into that role. You were chosen. You were asked by your leader to take that responsibility to do that thing. There's something you did, there's something you said, you proved yourself worthy of that responsibility or to grow into that opportunity. Don't forget that. Don't miss that. They just grab you by the collar and put you in there. They're not going to put a failure in that position. So
No.
remember that you have something to bring to the table, build on it. And I
Yeah.
know that's hokey, but that's the truth, right? Take
I
that hunger plus that proof and go be successful, right? And come back to podcast 4 through 10 or whatever, and we'll tell you more.
if we're looking at the individual operator or program project manager, what do they need to keep in mind? I started out with some 3 questions an operator can ask, but what is a process, or maybe it's a mindset or a thought process or a framework that you would bequeath to that PM to help them navigate, especially if they don't have the formal training, but even that, they still need the guidance too.
Yeah.
What would you pass on to them as something practical that they could take away?
The very first thing I would say is set your pride aside and absolutely at least the first, let's say that whole classic 30, 60, 90, up to about day 90, do not be afraid to ask every question. Okay. Don't think that the first day they put you in that role that you have to be the king or queen of knowledge for that situation. Ask every question. Now, put some thought into them, but do not let your pride and don't let this false expectation that you have to have all the answers keep you from getting what you need to be successful. Ask me how I know. Been there, done that, lather, rinse, repeat. You know, had to learn that lesson the hard way 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 times, right? A little dense. But yeah, ask the dumb questions because I guarantee you, your boss is sitting there waiting for you to ask. He or she probably has the answer or they know who does, but they've got their own things to do and they know that you don't know, but they're not going to go grab you and tell you
Yeah.
because they put you in a place of responsibility to know what you don't know. So ask, 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 ask. I, as a leader and my leaders, we are not going to be mad at you for asking questions. If you ask me the same question 3 times, I might get a bit irritated, but asking me is not a problem. I want you to,
I'm
right?
also gonna inject in there, please don't be the person that says this might be a stupid question, but
Right, yeah.
you're
And
rhetorically setting yourself up and everybody in the room
you
to
are,
expect that it's gonna
you are,
be a stupid question. Yeah, ask the
and
question,
it's
have
not.
confidence. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And I think the other thing too is that goes with that. Do not let your lack of knowledge paralyze you from acting. Remember, you're never ever going to have the whole picture ever. Even in a perfect world, ideal set, you're never going to have the whole picture. If you have enough to begin, because again, if you've got your targets and you've got your parameters, go. Don't sit and wait for everything to be baked because your boss, again, ask me how I know, your boss will get irritated. And why are we, it's been a week. Why have we not kicked off? Right. And what they're asking you with that question is they're not asking you to say to them, well, we haven't kicked off because of this, this, and this. They're asking you to give them a very good reason why you haven't kicked off, not what you're missing. Because your job is to go try to find those missing things and get them and go. They're asking you, why didn't you tell me you were stuck? Why didn't you tell me you didn't have XYZ? Why didn't you escalate to me? That's what that question is really asking you, right? So
Yeah.
don't dawdle. Again, goes back to if you don't know, ask. And if you feel stuck, throw your hand up, right? Learn from it. Now, next time you go get that yourself, right? Learn from what they teach you, learn from your mistakes, but do not be paralyzed. Number two. And number three, do not expect to be successful every single time. Do
Mm,
not expect to win every single battle. You are not going to hit every requirement. You're not going to charge every hill. You have to know what good enough is in terms of, hey, you know what? We got this thing as far as we could without help. I'm pretty confident that we've left nothing behind, but I need help now.
yeah.
Or, man, you know what? That just didn't land. I can't speak for everybody, but as a program manager, project manager, even with my ops hat on, I get too invested at times with what my customers, my internal customers, my external customers are handing me.
Mhm.
They will give me a requirement, let's say, Rebecca, and man, I am the biggest bulldog about that requirement. We are going to knock down every barrier or murder every enemy, whatever. We're going to hit that requirement. We're going to give it to them. Well, sometimes requirements suck, or sometimes my friends in marketing change their minds. And if I am just hell bent on driving to that goal and I'm not paying attention to the environment changing around me, I'm technically failing because I'm not delivering what they asked me to deliver because they darn well changed their mind. And I also can't get emotionally invested because it's just a thing. Don't get emotionally invested if they take it away from you. Your job is to care and feed for and steward, like you said a minute ago, the thing you're being asked to steward.
Yeah.
And they may change that thing on you in a moment's notice. They
Yeah.
will change that thing on you in a moment's notice. So, short answer there, don't get attached.
That's great advice, Kale, and that also kind of reaffirms why whether you are following capital A agile or lowercase a agile, having that agility around a project as a PM, as an operator, we all need that, and being able to give that why, that context before anybody has to ask, but also asking it of yourself too is equally important. There are questions that you need to be asking, but they are also questions you can be asking yourself too in these roles, and staying open to and curious. And I'll also add, like, as an operator, it's not, you need to focus on your people and if they have what they need without casting any blame or aspersions on them, right? So it's not, why did this person not do what I asked, but what in this process is making it easier or hard for them, and starting right there so that when you get to a PM who isn't able to move forward with something, it doesn't become a conversation. And this is where I think we're connecting the two roles and ideas together. It doesn't
Yeah.
become a conversation of, well, why didn't you do this thing versus why didn't you provide me with what I need? But hey, here's what I need. Hey, where is this breaking? Or where do you need the support to make it easier versus harder? And
As a leader, that's the toughest one as a leader and a person being led. That's probably the toughest one, and I think you might echo the sentiment with me. The one school of thought, MBA says, establish clear standards, hold them to the standards. When they don't hit the standards, ask them why. If it's a barrier, remove it, kick them off again, let them have a chance at the standards. If they don't hit it, ask them why. That time, it could be a corrective action, whatever the case may be. That is all of that happy path, in my mind, is predicated on they are clear on what they're being asked to do. Never
Mhm,
mind the standard is clear. They've had the training up front to be able to hit that standard. They've got the comfort and the support of leadership to know it's safe to ask,
mhm,
how do I hit that standard? Or I don't understand what that standard even means, right? If you haven't done that pre-work, I don't think it's fair to go straight to the you failed to meet the standards. What's wrong with you? Or bad boss. You failed to meet the standards. What blocked you? What can I do to help? That's a question you probably need to ask ahead of time and say, what can I do to help you make sure that you hit that standard the first time? Let's have a
exactly.
conversation about expectations and your expectations of me as your leader, the guy whose responsibilities is to steward, shepherd, protect, air cover, enable, empower you to succeed or fail on your own merits at that point. But it's my job to get you to that starting a block prepared, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You've got to be fair and you've got to be able to look at yourself and go, did I fail as a leader? That's the first question. Did I fail them? They blew the standard because I failed first? Not did they mess up? That's the third question. The second question is what's blocking? The third question is did they fail or why
Yeah.
did they fail? Right.
Yeah.
You've got to do it in that order, or your credibility as a leader is going to erode very quickly.
Yeah.
You will not get good results out of that resource for obvious reasons. And on the human level, you will not have a happy person on your team. Everything else from there will suffer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So starts with you.
I've said it to my team before. Operations sets up the architecture, the structure, systems. At the end of the day, it's always still about the people, right? And those systems, that architecture gives them the clarity that they need to flourish in the environment. And that is kindness. And when you are responsible for that, you are responsible for asking the what happened question so you can get to the why in a way that doesn't put people on defense and creates a collaborative, fruitful conversation that will help figure out the bottleneck, what is broken, what is a constraint to move forward. And so that's what I hope that we've left with everybody today. What operations is, what project management, what program management is, a little bit
Yeah.
of how they're connected, and then how you can take that and put some practical questions and tips to use to navigate your own.
Do you mind if I throw one thing out? You said kindness, and I think it's key. This is one of those things where it took me a long time to internalize what kindness means. And I could make a couple of pop culture references to a song no one even knows. Kindness is not always sugar sweet, right? If
Right.
they've got a development opportunity, you are doing them a kindness by telling them quantitatively how to be successful, how to get themselves out of that hole that they find themselves in, whether they put themselves there or not. Kindness is helping them understand and giving them the tools to get themselves out.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily you're not going to give them a hug, right? It's not always a kindness is not niceness. Kind and
No.
nice are two different things. You
Yeah.
know, I confuse those 2 for the longest time. I am not doing my people a kindness by mollycoddling them or by keeping them from being buffeted or really putting a nice cottony layer over the truth.
Yeah.
I was nice. They didn't get the message. They didn't get the kindness message because I was too busy being nice about how I told them be better, right?
Yeah.
Sounds a
Yeah.
little complicated, sounds confusing, but I'll have to say kindness and nice are not always synonymous.
There you go. That's a great way to wrap up episode
Yeah.
3. We could probably do a whole episode on that too. But you heard it
Yeah.
from us, folks. Thank you all for tuning in to Operations Playbook. More on ops, management, and everything in between in the next one. Thank you all for tuning in. And thank you, Kale.